Move your boat off our lake by Saturday or there will be consequences. Those were the first words I read on a glaring neon notice taped to the side of my pickup. I had just returned from an early morning fishing trip, proud of the 2 beautiful bass I'd caught, when I spotted that warning. My name is Lucas Hayes, and the lake in question belongs to me, passed down from my late father, who spent a lifetime preserving its natural beauty. Yet here stood an edict from the Maple Bridge Homeowners Association, claiming they had authority to regulate my old aluminum boat and the dock it was moored to. At first, I laughed in disbelief. The audacity was almost comical. A group of suburban enforcers trying to run me off what is rightfully mine. Then I read the signature. Karen Holland, the HOA president who had a reputation for terrorizing anyone she perceived as an eyesore or a rule break. Though I'd never met her, I'd heard that when Karen set her sights on something, she wouldn't rest until she bulldozed the opposition, figuratively or literally. That neon note spelled trouble, and it was a warning shot I couldn't ignore. The morning sun glinted off the water as I walked down to my makeshift dock, an old structure my father built with his own hands. We'd always called the lake simply Hayes Lake, even if it never officially bore that name on any map. Dad used to say that caring for it was both a privilege and a burden. No matter how many times I tried to reassure myself that everything would be fine, that the HOA had to be mistaken, I felt a pang of anxiety. Karen's note mentioned fines of $500 a day if I refused to remove my boat, plus the threat of towing. Towing a boat off a private lake? My father would have had a field day mocking such arrogance, but he was gone now, leaving me to inherit not just his property, but all the headaches that came with it. I folded the notice, stuck it in my jacket pocket, and vowed to figure out how this bizarre claim came to be. Within an hour, my phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Sir, you are in violation of Maple Bridge HOA guidelines. Failure to respond will escalate this matter to legal channels." It was official then. The harassment had started. Part of me wondered if there'd been some administrative confusion, like maybe our property lines overlapped with HOA land. But I doubted it. My father was meticulous, and I'd spent time reviewing the county records after his passing. The lake was indeed within the boundaries of our family land, plus a swath of forested area that formed a natural buffer. That buffer separated our plot from the Maple Bridge development, a large housing community built near the county highway. I'd always assumed we were safe from their meddling. Clearly, that assumption was wrong. So I decided to investigate, starting with a call to a friend who worked in the county clerk's office. Her name was Tina Ward, a longtime acquaintance of my dad. She had a knack for unearthing obscure paperwork, and she'd do it quietly if needed. Tina picked up on the second ring. "Lucas, it's been a while. You don't call unless something's up. Spill the beans." I chuckled at her straightforwardness, then explained what had happened, reading aloud from the neon notice. I heard her gasp. "That's insane," she muttered, promising to check their local records, maybe see if Maple Bridge had filed any expansions or boundary reclassifications. Before we hung up, she said, "Watch your back, Lucas. I've heard rumors that the Maple Bridge HOA has strong ties with the county supervisor. They might be pushing boundaries, hoping no one fights back." That remark put me even more on guard. While waiting for Tina's return call, I decided to drive across the lake to see if any obvious signs of encroachment were visible. I hopped into my pickup, turned onto a gravel path that encircled the water, and soon noticed a newly built structure, what looked like a small boathouse, on a portion of the shoreline I knew for a fact was mine. A sign reading "Property of Maple Bridge HOA, no trespassing" made my blood boil. Was I trespassing on my own land now? My stomach twisted in knots. I parked, got out, and took photos with my phone for evidence. No one was around, but the boathouse seemed recently painted, and I saw footprints leading away from it. The realization that someone had quietly built a structure on my side of the lake filled me with a mix of anger and disbelief. Driving home, I wondered how my father would have handled this. He was a quiet man, but stubborn as an ox when defending something he believed in. I guess I inherited that streak from him. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Tina. "Lucas, I've got good news and bad news. The good news, the records confirm you own the entire lake. The bad news, Maple Bridge's management filed a proposal last year claiming they plan to purchase part of the adjoining land from some unnamed seller, presumably to expand their lakeside facilities." She paused. "But that sale never went through. Maybe they think they can scare you into submission or force you to sell. Or maybe they've convinced themselves you're just a formality." A second wave of fury hit me. I thanked Tina for the info, then decided it was time to face the issue head on. The next day, I phoned the Maple Bridge HOA office. A receptionist answered, and I asked if I could speak with Karen Holland. The receptionist sounded surprised, but eventually Karen came on the line. "Hello, this is Karen. Who am I speaking with?" she said in a clipped tone. I introduced myself. "So you're the one," she replied. "I trust you received our notice. We can't have random boats violating our community's aesthetic. If you don't comply, we will impose fines." "Ma'am," I said, trying to sound calm, "that lake is not yours. I don't live within your development. My family has owned it for decades, and I have the deed to prove it." She let out a dismissive laugh. "That's not how we see it. I have documents indicating Maple Bridge is responsible for lake upkeep and usage. Either way, you're storing an unauthorized boat on it, so please remove it or we'll handle it ourselves." I nearly lost my composure. "If you so much as touch that boat, I'll file a theft report. You have no jurisdiction. Have a nice day." I hung up, my hands shaking from anger. Immediately, I typed up a quick email to a local attorney, Brandon West, who specialized in property disputes. I explained the situation, asked for an urgent consultation, then forced myself to step outside and walk around the lakeshore to cool off. The water shimmered in the afternoon sunlight, reminding me how my father used to skim stones here. My eyes drifted across the calm expanse, reflecting on the absurdity that I had become locked in a turf war with a suburban HOA. A day later, Brandon called me back. "Lucas, this is definitely an overreach if your deed is clear," he said. "But HOAs can be tricky. Some counties let them expand if there's some claim of historical usage. We need to verify everything in writing. I'll start drafting a cease and desist. Meanwhile, keep logs of all communications, and let me know immediately if they move your boat or do anything else." His words reassured me that I wasn't alone, but they also confirmed the conflict might escalate. For a moment, I thought about simply towing my boat onto my property and storing it away from the shore, avoiding a direct clash. But the principle of the matter burned in me. That lake was mine, and I'd be damned if I'd let an overbearing HOA claim it. I wanted to stand my ground, to honor what my father left me. As I was pondering this, a neighbor I barely knew drove by and rolled down his window. "Hey, you're the Hayes kid, right?" he asked. "I heard rumors that Maple Bridge is trying to annex your lake. Don't let them push you around. They bullied me out of planting a vegetable garden near their boundary last year." I thanked him and realized this was bigger than just a boat. This was about a pattern of bullying and overreach. That same evening, I found another note stuck to the post of my mailbox advising me that I was invited to attend the next HOA board meeting to resolve the dispute. The language was polite but had a threatening undertone, making it clear that if I didn't show up, they'd proceed unchallenged. So I decided I'd attend. I'd bring my lawyer, my deed, and a determination not to be steamrolled by Karen or her cronies. The night of the meeting arrived. I stepped into the Maple Bridge Community Hall with Brandon at my side. Rows of neatly arranged chairs faced a long table where Karen and 3 other board members sat, scanning the room with an air of condescension. The walls were adorned with pictures of community picnics, children's Easter egg hunts, and older folks smiling while reeling in fish. One big photo even displayed a sign saying, "Welcome to Maple Bridge Fishing Club," with an arrow pointing toward what looked suspiciously like my lake shoreline. I bit my tongue, waiting for them to start. Karen tapped her gavel lightly, as though she were presiding over a courtroom. She introduced herself, the board members, and then announced the meeting's agenda: compliance issues, new landscaping rules, and the dispute regarding an out-of-compliance water vessel. That was my cue. Brandon nudged me, and I stood up, introduced myself, and stated that I'd been summoned to discuss my boat. Karen's gaze was cold. "Mr. Hayes," she began, "your unauthorized boat remains on a lake that Maple Bridge has spent time and resources maintaining. It violates our regulations. We have repeatedly asked you to remove it, but you haven't complied." I clenched my jaw, trying not to snap. "Miss Holland, that lake is on my property. I have the deed proving it. Perhaps your management was misinformed about property lines. However, the fact remains that Maple Bridge has no legal claim." I handed over copies of the deed and property surveys. She barely glanced at them. "We have a different survey," she retorted, "home that indicates shared usage, and we have documents showing that the Maple Bridge Fishing Club has been hosting events on this body of water for years." Other comment raised a murmur from the audience. I could see a few residents looking puzzled, while some nodded as though fully backing Karen. One man in a polo shirt stood up. "My father's been fishing there for more than a decade with the HOA," he said. "Nobody ever complained before." I sighed and resisted the urge to roll my eyes. "That doesn't change ownership," I explained calmly. "My father allowed local folks to fish occasionally because he was a nice man. But now you're demanding the removal of my own boat? That's absurd." Brandon cleared his throat. "We're prepared to pursue legal action if the association continues to harass Mr. Hayes or attempts to impound his personal property." He spoke with that polished attorney confidence that made me glad I'd hired him. The board members exchanged uncomfortable looks, except for Karen, who remained unreadable behind her composure. She lifted a hand to hush the crowd and stated, "We won't allow any one person to hold the community hostage. We have bigger plans for the lake, improvements that will benefit everyone. If you don't want to join us, you can't impede progress." The phrase "bigger plans" set off alarm bells in my mind. The rumored marina or expansion must be in the works, I realized, and they needed my shore to complete it. I felt a sudden, fierce protectiveness. "You're the ones who've overstepped. It's my land, and I won't be pressured into giving it up. If you think you can forcibly acquire it, we'll see you in court." The tension in the room peaked, and Karen adjourned the meeting quickly, ignoring any further questions. People began filing out, but a few lingered, approaching me to ask if it was true that Maple Bridge had no rightful claim. When I affirmed it, some looked shocked, others looked worried. One older woman whispered that she'd suspected the HOA was stretching its authority for years. Brandon and I walked back to my truck, hearts still pounding from the confrontation. "They're definitely planning something," he said. "We need to gather every piece of evidence we can. Photos, testimony from neighbors, anything proving your father's undisputed ownership. If the HOA wants a war, we'll give them one." The next morning, I woke to find fresh tire tracks near the dock, accompanied by footprints that led right up to my boat. My blood ran cold. I checked the boat. It appeared intact, but I discovered a bright orange sticker slapped on the hull, reading Maple Bridge HOA, Official Removal Notice. My frustration boiled. They were trying to provoke me. That same afternoon, I set up a couple of motion-sensitive wildlife cameras around the property to catch anyone approaching. My father used such cameras to document deer and foxes, not HOA trespassers, but desperate times called for unorthodox measures. Later that week, Brandon managed to track down a city planner who leaked that Maple Bridge had recently filed a formal request to develop a new clubhouse, expanded parking, and, most tellingly, a fish cleaning station on the eastern side of their lake. Their lake. The city planner even offered a copy of the conceptual design, which obviously encompassed a good chunk of my property. This was proof enough that they intended to push their boundary claims by any means necessary. I sat on my porch, reviewing the stolen documents, which showed a large, modern building right where my father's orchard used to stand, plus a small marina on my shoreline. I couldn't believe their nerve. In that moment, I felt the full weight of my father's legacy. How he'd battled unscrupulous developers in the past, how he'd refused to sell even when times were tough. Letting the HOA bulldoze our land now would betray everything he worked for. The day after that discovery, Karen summoned me again, this time via an email CC'd to several Maple Bridge officials, stating that if I didn't remove the boat within 48 hours, they'd confiscate it. Brandon drafted a cease and desist letter referencing county records and the threat of legal repercussions. We delivered it in person, but the HOA office was locked, so I slipped it under the door. As I walked away, I spotted a well-dressed man standing near a sleek black SUV, eyeing me. Something about his manner set off alarms, like he was there to observe me or gather intel. I pretended not to notice him, but once inside my truck, I snapped a quick photo from behind the windshield. That evening, a friend from the local newspaper, Joy Sutton, called. She'd heard rumors about a property dispute between me and Maple Bridge, and I told her the gist of it. She wanted to run a piece on alleged HOA overreach. My gut reaction was caution. I wasn't sure I wanted to publicize my fight just yet, but Joy argued that public exposure might help prevent shady dealings from festering. So I agreed to an off-the-record conversation, at least to see what angle she had in mind. When I went to bed that night, I double-checked every lock. Anxiety churned in my chest. Were they bold enough to show up at 2 a.m. and tow my boat away, or slash my tires to force me out? My father's old shotgun was in the closet, but I didn't want things to turn ugly. All I really wanted was for them to respect my rights. Sure enough, the next morning, one of the wildlife cameras captured a woman in a neon jacket approaching the dock at dawn. She tried to remove the bright orange sticker or replace it with something else. Her face was partially obscured, but her posture looked suspiciously like Karen's. She left quickly, apparently hearing a noise. I saved the video to a USB drive, adding it to the growing evidence. Then came the day everything escalated. I returned from a quick grocery run to find my boat had vanished. Dock empty, rope cut. My heart pounded. They'd actually taken it. A note pinned to my door read, "Boat removed per Maple Bridge HOA regulations. Reclaim after paying impound fees." Furious, I called Brandon. He told me to file a police report immediately, which I did. But the officer who showed up gave me a lukewarm response, cautioning that HOA disputes can be complicated. I insisted it was theft, plain and simple. He took down the details but seemed reluctant to intervene. Brendan kicked into high gear, filing an emergency motion for the boat's return. Meanwhile, the local paper published Joy Sutton's article, HOA Overreach? Local resident alleges forced removal of boat from private lake. The piece highlighted the suspicious nature of Maple Bridge's expansion plans, quoting me anonymously as a longtime landowner. Karen refused to comment for the article. The story went semi-viral on social media, with many folks outraged, calling Karen an example of peak HOA tyranny. Suddenly, more neighbors began coming forward with complaints about Maple Bridge. Some had been fined for having a small shed in their backyard, others for planting the wrong color flowers. A pattern of intimidation emerged. A particularly chilling account came from a retired teacher who said Karen threatened to report her for code violations if she didn't stop complaining at board meetings. My boat's removal seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back, galvanizing others to speak out. Brandon and I arrived at the county courthouse for the hearing on our emergency motion, bringing documents, photos, and even the wildlife camera footage. A judge took one look at the evidence and appeared stunned that an HOA would go so far as to confiscate property not even within their official boundaries. Maple Bridge's lawyer tried to argue that the boat was unregistered and in violation of community aesthetics, but the judge cut him off. That might apply to someone within your HOA's jurisdiction, the judge admonished, but Mr. Hayes's property is not part of Maple Bridge. You had no right to seize his boat. The judge ordered them to return the boat within 24 hours and cease any further attempts to regulate it. He also scheduled a follow-up hearing to address the boundary dispute. Karen wasn't present, but her lawyer left the courtroom looking rattled. It felt like a small victory, but we knew the main fight, proving they had zero claim over my land, was still looming. That afternoon, a Maple Bridge maintenance truck pulled up to my driveway, hauling my old aluminum boat. 2 workers unhooked it, muttered apologies, and drove away. My boat looked intact except for a fresh coat of scuffs along the side. Furious but relieved, I took photos of the damage, determined to hold them accountable in the follow-up hearing. As soon as the boat was back, the newscaster I'd spoken with earlier requested an on-camera interview. I considered it carefully, then agreed, thinking public scrutiny might keep the HOA honest. On live TV, I explained that Maple Bridge had forcibly taken my boat from private property. The broadcast included footage from Joy Sutton's article, plus a short statement from Brandon asserting that we'd prove our ownership beyond doubt. In response, Maple Bridge issued a press release claiming their long-standing stewardship of the lake, offering no tangible proof. Behind the scenes, rumors swirled that Karen and certain board members had connections to real estate developers hungry to create a larger marina, complete with upscale condos. A neighbor confided in me that he'd overheard talk of backroom deals with county officials, possibly ensuring no one would question their creeping land grab. I started to see the bigger picture. My boat was just a symbol of my presence, a reminder that the lake wasn't free for them to exploit. Removing it was the first step in steamrolling me out of the way. But now that the boat fiasco had hit the news, Karen and her allies were under a spotlight. Residents flooded Maple Bridge's board with demands for transparency, questioning where their dues were actually going. Some older folks started rummaging through old records, finding no mention of the association ever legitimately purchasing or leasing my portion of the shore. Meanwhile, a few courageous souls confronted Karen only to be met with her usual dismissive arrogance. As the scheduled boundary dispute hearing approached, Brandon discovered a crucial piece of evidence. A letter from my father to the original Maple Bridge developers dated over 15 years ago, explicitly denying them permission to build on or use the lake. The letter mentioned that Dad had no problem with neighbors enjoying a casual day of fishing, but he wanted no commercial or large-scale events unless they negotiated a formal agreement. There was no record of any such agreement ever having been signed. We arrived at the courthouse prepared to bury Maple Bridge under the mountain of evidence. Karen herself showed up this time, in a navy blue suit exuding an air of defiance. She refused to make eye contact with me. Her attorney tried to argue that Dad's letter was irrelevant because it was outdated and that Maple Bridge had effectively managed the lake for years. The judge, however, wasn't swayed by vague statements of management. Brandon presented official maps, tax records, deeds, that letter from my dad, plus testimonies from neighbors who'd fished there freely without any formal HOA regulation. Karen's face blanched as the judge systematically dismantled each of the HOA's claims. The court ruled that Maple Bridge had no ownership or governance rights over the lake or my dock. I was declared the undisputed landowner, and the HOA was enjoined from any further attempts to regulate or remove my property. Karen tried to argue for an appeal, but the judge told her that if Maple Bridge wanted to continue, they'd need solid legal ground. Right then, it was clear they had none. Walking out of that hearing, I felt an enormous weight lift off my shoulders. The local news cameras were waiting, capturing Karen's grim face as she strode quickly to her car. Brandon and I gave a brief statement about the victory, reiterating that my father's wishes to preserve the lake as private property but remain open to friendly neighbors would stand. On social media, the story spread like wildfire, sparking debates about HOA overreach and property rights. Days later, I started receiving calls from Maple Bridge residents apologizing or thanking me. Apparently, with the negative exposure, many realized they'd been deceived about the HOA's scope of authority. Some had even been paying lake maintenance fees, believing it was part of their official membership. Now they demanded refunds and questioned Karen's leadership. It seemed that the fallout from this fiasco had turned the community against its own board. Then, an unexpected twist occurred. A disgruntled board member leaked emails showing that Karen and a local developer had indeed been orchestrating a grand plan, a marina and a small resort, for the Maple Bridge Lake. Their pitch deck described purchasing or absorbing adjacent land to expand. The emails indicated they tried to rope in certain county officials by promising a tourism boost. This revelation fueled even more public anger, leading to calls for Karen's resignation. Some residents threatened a class action lawsuit against the board for misrepresenting the HOA's authority and mishandling funds. Public sentiment snowballed. Karen's carefully manicured facade began to crack. Another local newspaper published an expose detailing the shady dealings, including mentions of questionable relationships with county inspectors who conveniently looked the other way when Maple Bridge built unauthorized structures. One official even resigned under suspicion of taking bribes. I almost felt a hint of pity for Karen, watching her ambitions collapse under their own deceit. But then I remembered how she'd stolen my boat, harassed me, and tried to bully me off my own land. Sympathy gave way to satisfaction that justice was being served. With her power dwindling, Karen made a last-ditch attempt to extend an olive branch. She emailed me, claiming it was all a misunderstanding and that Maple Bridge genuinely believed they had partial ownership. She offered to buy a section of my lakefront at a price that was, frankly, insulting. I deleted her message without replying. Meanwhile, Brandon sent a final notice that we were considering a lawsuit for damages related to the boat theft and property defacement. Karen's lawyer tried to settle, but we were not in a forgiving mood. My father taught me to stand firm when you know you're in the right. The county eventually ordered Maple Bridge to remove the unauthorized boathouse from my land. That dismantling process was oddly satisfying to witness, watching their brand new construction come down piece by piece. A few of the association's top board members resigned in shame, including the treasurer, who apparently knew about the misappropriated lake maintenance fees. Perrin attempted to cling to her position for a short while longer, but faced with a no-confident vote and potential legal consequences, she stepped down, claiming she needed time for personal matters. In the aftermath, Maple Bridge elected a new, more moderate board that disavowed Karen's strategies. They even sent me a written apology, acknowledging that my property was never part of their domain. The letter included a request. Could we still allow some local fishermen to use the lake responsibly? They recognized that my father used to let certain neighbors enjoy it with basic courtesy. I agreed, under conditions that they ask for permission each time and respect my rules. No big events, no structures, and no illusions about who owned the place. The new board seemed relieved to have a straightforward arrangement. Meanwhile, local media praised the outcome as a rare victory against HOA overreach. Brandon, happy with our success, joked that we should open a law practice specializing in lake defense. We both knew the next unscrupulous developer or power-hungry HOA wasn't far away, but for now, we could breathe. The fiasco had ended in my favor, and the lake remained in the hands of those who truly cared about it. One quiet afternoon, I sat on the dock, gazing at the calm water where my father used to skip stones, letting memories flood back. I recalled how he'd always say, "Nature has a way of humbling us if we try to control it too much. Always respect what's bigger than you." The fight with Maple Bridge tested my resolve, but also confirmed my respect for this land. The lake was more than just a scenic spot. It was a testament to my family's history and a symbol of standing up to bullies. I brushed my hand along the scuffed side of my boat, the paint scratched from its impound ordeal, and felt a surge of gratitude that I'd managed to defend something so precious. As the sun dipped lower, turning the sky gold, I grabbed a fishing rod and cast a line, remembering simpler days spent with Dad. The bobber danced on the water's surface. The only sound was the breeze in the pines and the faint echo of bullfrogs. That moment reminded me why my father cherished this place and refused to sell it despite many tempting offers. Some things can't be measured in profit, like heritage, tranquility, and the satisfaction of preserving what's yours. In the weeks that followed, rumor had it that Karen was relocating to another state, hoping to find fresh territory for her strict brand of community management. Maple Bridge was left to rebuild trust among its residents. A new sense of relief seemed to pervade the neighborhood. One family who'd always wanted to fish at the lake wrote me a courteous letter asking permission to bring their kids on a Saturday afternoon. Touched by the kindness, I said yes, and they came, fished respectfully, and later thanked me profusely. That small courtesy underlined how different it was when you approached people with goodwill instead of intimidation. I realized, too, that it wasn't my duty to punish all the Maple Bridge residents for Karen's wrongdoing. Most were decent folks who simply placed faith in the wrong leaders. Dad's orchard was still partly intact, and I decided to replant some trees in his memory, a quiet reminder that not all growth involves bulldozing over boundaries. The orchard now stands as a testament to my family's legacy and the land we vowed to protect. Eventually, the city council declared that any future proposals for development around the lake must involve thorough environmental assessments and explicit consent from me, the sole owner. That was another triumph, a guarantee that no shady deals could slip through the cracks. The hush money that Karen and her developer allies had hoped to generate from an upscale marina was lost. Instead, Maple Bridge had to redirect its funds to more modest community improvements. A new playground, better street lighting, and a dog park. When a couple of my neighbors asked if they could build a small fishing pier on their side of the community, I politely replied that they'd need to talk to the new board, and also discuss with me if it encroached on my property. They seemed relieved that at least now there were clear boundaries and no illusions about who owned what. Brandon eventually presented me with a final settlement from the HOA's insurer, covering the damage to my boat and some of my legal fees. I felt vindicated, although no amount of money could fully compensate for the stress and aggravation. Still, the check was tangible proof that I'd stood up for myself. And won. As I read the settlement terms, I glimpsed a bright future for the lake, and for me. No more threats on neon paper, no more surprise visits from property zealots claiming dominion. The sense of calm was almost overwhelming. One day, as the summer sun poured across my porch, I received a call from Joy Sutton. She wanted to do a follow-up story from Battleground to Sanctuary, one man's victory against HOA overreach. I hesitated, but eventually agreed. We met on the shore, where I pointed out the orchard I'd been reviving. I explained how my father had taught me to respect the land, never treat it like a disposable commodity. Joy listened intently, scribbling notes for her piece. I also told her about the relief I'd felt when the judge declared my ownership, and how that moment reaffirmed my father's final words. This lake is a gift. Protect it from greed. Karen never gave me an apology in person. Perhaps it was too much to expect. But in a strange way, her attempt to seize the lake caused the entire community to reevaluate what they wanted out of Maple Bridge. The fiasco drew neighbors closer, prompting them to question the fairness of their rules, the transparency of their leadership, and the importance of property rights. Even some board members who once rubber-stamped Karen's initiatives took a step back, realizing how easily they'd been led astray by her forceful style. 3 months later, in the crisp air of early autumn, I launched my boat at sunrise and paddled across the glassy surface. The reflection of turning leaves created a kaleidoscope of oranges and reds on the water. I paused in the middle of the lake, letting the hush of nature envelop me. A sense of pride welled up at the knowledge that I'd protected this space, not just for myself, but for future generations of Hayes family members, maybe my kids or grandkids someday. My father's orchard was gradually reviving on the northern slope, a living memorial to his devotion to the land. When the fish began biting, I reeled in a decent-sized bass, same as I used to do with Dad as a kid. A warmth spread through me, deeper than the morning sun. By defending the lake, I kept alive more than just property lines. I preserved a piece of family history, upheld my father's wishes, and gave Maple Bridge a lesson in boundaries. Literal and metaphorical. Some lines simply cannot be crossed. Over time, I'd spot the occasional Maple Bridge resident strolling by with a fishing pole or a camera, carefully staying on their side unless they had my permission. A friendly wave would pass between us. The mood around the lake was different now, no longer shrouded in tension. People seemed to understand that civility goes a lot further than intimidation. I often recalled how quickly the conflict erupted and how it all could have been avoided with honest dialogue. But it wasn't in Karen's nature to ask politely. She preferred steamrolling, and that approach ultimately spelled her downfall. Word spread to nearby communities about the fiasco, and I even got a few messages from strangers dealing with their own HOAs, asking for advice. I told them what I'd learned. Always gather every scrap of evidence, Keep calm in the face of provocation, find a good lawyer, and never yield your rights out of fear. That was my father's spirit speaking through me. He might have shunned lawsuits in principle, but he always believed in justice. Standing up for what's right was never optional in our family. One mild afternoon, Brandon showed up with a six-pack of beer, wanting to celebrate our victory anniversary, as he called it. We clinked bottles on the dock, exchanging stories about the bizarre statements Karen's lawyer had tried to make in court. Brandon teased me about how I'd become a local hero in some circles. I just shook my head, insisting I was no hero, just a regular guy who refused to be bullied, but he pressed. "Lucas, you beat a corrupt system that tried to steamroll you. That's heroic in my book." I smiled modestly, unable to argue with his sentiment. Later that night, I found an old journal of Dad's tucked away in a dusty trunk. Leafing through it, I stumbled across entries describing how a different developer once tried to claim the lake was public domain. Dad wrote about how he calmly corrected them but never let them push him around, using the same unwavering stance I'd ended up employing. Reading his words, I felt an indescribable closeness, as though he'd passed down not just the land, but also the courage to shield it. Sometimes I'd dream of him, standing on the dock in his wide-brimmed hat, casting a line at dawn. I'd walk over to show him the scuff marks on the boat from the impound fiasco, and he'd just grin, patting me on the shoulder. Then I'd wake up, the crisp morning light filtering through the cabin's windows, and realize that dream wasn't far from reality. In my mind, Dad's legacy was as tangible as the orchard trees, as steady as the dock under my feet, and as enduring as the waters that lapped against the shore. Shortly thereafter, Joy Sutton's follow-up piece was published, titled "Defending Home Waters: A Community Learns Boundaries the Hard Way." It painted a picture of transformation, both in Maple Bridge and in my own life. She interviewed a couple of neighbors who praised the new board's more transparent approach, including open monthly meetings that addressed real concerns instead of pushing secret agendas. She also quoted me, describing how I felt that the lake was finally safe from predatory expansion. The article ended with a reflection on how communities thrive when leaders respect individual rights, bridging gaps with cooperation instead of conflict. Time rolled on. The orchard took root. The fish kept biting, and the local kids who earned my permission to fish always left the area clean, often thanking me in person. The new Maple Bridge board asked if they could host a modest family fishing day once every 6 months. In writing, they agreed to abide by rules. No building, no intrusion onto my property, no attempts to claim the lake as their own. I reluctantly said yes, curious to see if they'd respect the boundaries. So far, they have. While Karen's name still surfaces occasionally, it's usually in a cautionary context, an example of how an HOA can implode if it oversteps. No one in Maple Bridge seems eager for her return, and if she set foot on my land, it would be purely symbolic of the old battles. I suspect she's off somewhere, trying her tactics in another community. But maybe she learned a lesson. The events that transpired here taught me that yes, some HOAs can be beneficial, but in the wrong hands, they become petty tyrannies with dangerous illusions of grandeur. These days, life is calm, just the way I like it. I still keep an eye out for any suspicious footprints near the dock, but mostly I trust that the cameras and the memory of a public legal defeat keep intruders away. On many mornings, I stand on the bank with a cup of coffee in hand, watching the mist rise over the water, listening to birds greet the sunrise. I reflect on everything that's happened, how a single slip of neon paper started a chain reaction, unveiling corruption and forcing a community to confront its misdeeds. My father might say that adversity reveals truth, and I'm inclined to believe he was right. Though here I remain, caretaker of a lake that was and always will be a family treasure. A lake that almost fell into the clutches of a power-hungry HOA, saved by the willingness to fight back with the law, the press, and a fierce sense of justice. Whenever I set foot on that dock, the gentle lapping of water reminds me that true ownership isn't about tyranny or forced compliance, but about respect, both for the land itself and for the people around it. That's how my father lived, and that's how I plan to honor his legacy. There's an unspoken contract here between me and these waters, a contract that no piece of neon paper or overreaching president can ever take away.